SPFX stuff or Power Apps stuff or?
So let's get started.
Oh, okay, get started.
And then we'll save that for question and after following.
All right.
We'll get to know those of us that are here in the room. So welcome to the September MUGUT.
Socialize at the beginning.
We're so excited to have everybody here. We've got 5 of us in the room with the promise of 2 additionals to join when their meetings here are done. We have 2 or 3 people online, including Bryant. So some housekeeping before we get started. Here's our gotta go find the slideshow. Here's our agenda. So we're in the welcome, and we're done with the welcome because I welcomed everybody. So let's talk housekeeping. Here's our leadership. We have Josh, we have Ron in the room, we have Noah online. Noah lives in the South 40 of Utah County, and so doesn't very often get up here to civilization. Noah, we're super glad to have you online with us, though.
We got Kip on the other side of the wall there.
And Kip on the other side of the wall that said he will join us shortly. You can see that we've changed the rules. It used to be that we wanted everybody to go on mute and to save their questions for the end. And it turns out that's a pile of horse whatnot. And so we've now said, as soon as you have a question, yell, let us know. In previous times, I would have 2 laptops, and so I could watch for chatted questions. I only have the 1 laptop that's running the meeting, and so I can't do that anymore. And so speak up, be audible, and let Bryant know that you have a question, and he will be thrilled to answer it. Right, Bryant?
Happy to.
If you're looking to hire somebody or be hired, drop a note into the chat. I won't see it, but the other people in the meeting will. If you're in the room, you can always go back to that chat later and look at it. As soon as I get around to it, I will post a recording on YouTube. So if you don't follow us, if you don't follow our YouTube channel, go and do that so that you can then go back and witness the glory that is this meeting over and over and over again. Any questions? Okay, so we're super excited to have Bryant join us from his warm home in Washington. Bryant is mere moments away from welcoming Boyer number 3 to the family. Boy or girl, Bryant?
We don't know. It's a surprise.
Oh, so Bryant is what we call a Luddite. doesn't do that ultrasound thing. No, I love it. I love the fact that you're going into it unsuspecting. So a little boy or girl to join the Boyer house any moment now. And so if he leaves in the middle of the call, we'll understand that he has other priorities. Bryant has been part of the Utah SharePoint scene for a decade now, seems like quite a long time. He has worked for a couple of companies here in the Valley and then joined Slalom and moved to Washington, where he can enjoy the rain on a more full-time basis, and is the center of excellence manager, director, owner, leader, something for Slalom. I told him that he could refute my introduction as soon as I get done. I put the words up there that I stole from his LinkedIn. You should go and say hi on LinkedIn if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you're here in the room, you could do the same. So that's Bryant. He's going to walk us through what Slalom is doing with the Power Platform. We're going to look at Power BI. We're going to look at Power Automate, and we're going to look at Power Apps and some of the things that Slalom has done for their customers that should give us an idea of what we can do for our customers or in our own organizations. So with that, Bryant, I'm going to stop sharing, and the floor is yours.
Excellent. I'll just share my screen here. All right. Yeah, to redact some of the falsehoods that were just said. Yeah, I've been involved with the SharePoint user group and Microsoft Utah community since 2016. That's when I graduated BYU with a degree in mechanical engineering, but started work at a small company called Brainstorm in American Fork that does Microsoft adoption and training. So I started work there in 2016, eventually ran into Power BI and learned Power Automate and the Power Platform. And Noah drugged me along to some of these SharePoint user groups where I started to meet many of you and get my foothold on the Power Platform and SharePoint more broadly. In early 2020, I got a job offer from Slalom Consulting and moved up to Seattle to be a Power Platform consultant. And for me, huge transformation for my career. I have loved the shift to doing Power Platform consulting. Slalom's got 13,000 consultants. We have a Microsoft Center of Excellence that is now 150 people who specialize in really, really deep skill sets with the Power Platform. So I'm really excited to talk to you all about the things that we can and have done with the Power Platform. If you want to connect with me, you can do so on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter at the Flowhawk. I'm wearing a hat today, but I promise you this is me. And then I also publish videos on YouTube as well. A lot of stuff dealing with SharePoint and how SharePoint and the Power Platform come together. That's what my YouTube channel is really all about. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the Power Platform and what it is. Essentially, Microsoft's got its three main clouds. Microsoft Azure for enterprise-grade computing, Microsoft 365, which we all know and love, the Productivity Suite, Outlook, OneNote, Yammer, and then the Microsoft Dynamics 365 cloud with business applications, Dynamics sales, marketing, customer insights, customer data platforms. And right in the middle of it all, Microsoft threw a suite of tools they call the Power Platform.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah.
Say Yammer just because Noah's here.
You know I did.
All right.
You know I did. Yeah.
I know that Noah's on mute right now, because we didn't hear a woohoo when somebody said Yammer.
Exactly. Power Platform was really meant to bridge the gap and connect all these three clouds together so you could leverage the different pieces of each one to make more customizable solutions. And it's actually been hugely successful from Microsoft's perspective in terms of adoption. The suite of tools are 5 main tools. It's Power Apps for low-code app development, Power Automate for low-code workflows, Power BI, which is the one that's been around the longest. I believe Power Automate was published first in 2016. Power BI has been around, for a long, long time. Power Virtual Agents, which is low-code chatbots, and then the most recent addition to this family was announced in June of this year, which is Power Pages, low-code external portals. That was Dynamics portals, became Power Apps portals, is now Power Pages, rebranded. Kind of like Wix for Microsoft, if you could think of it that way. Publish your own websites. On the outer ring of this and the tools that support it all would be Microsoft Dataverse, a low-code database as a service solution. PowerFX, which is, you can think of that as like Excel functions turned into a programming language, so a low-code programming language. And then AI Builder is Azure AI and ML, but packaged in a way that's more easy to use and plug into your solutions. So you can use it to process things like documents and extract data, OCR, natural language processing, all of that. Apart from that, Microsoft's releasing they were doing it at like 50 connectors a month. Now it's down to like 10 or 12 that they publish every month. We're up over 700 data connectors that Microsoft certifies, and then management tools on top of that to govern and administer the platform. I talked about these all at a high level already. I'm not going to spend time going through them one by one. The suite itself is also much more broad when you think about the ways they all connect together. We didn't even talk about RPA. Power Automate's got RPA tools that if this thing doesn't have an API, we can still interact with it using RPA. And outside of that, we've also got the ability to create custom connectors. So if we don't have something out of the box with those 700 plus connectors that Microsoft's provided, they give you the ability to create your own connectors and then publish those connectors for use with solutions across your organization. We're also freed up with data gateways, all of the Azure suite of tools and services that are out there that can be charged and done on a usage or computation basis, and then all of the Dynamics 365 and Office 365 services. And it all centers around this idea of low code, no code. I studying mechanical engineering and then coming into a training scenario for my first job out of college, I really was a citizen developer. I didn't really understand the tenets or best practices for developing enterprise-grade solutions. I was just kind of Wild West out there creating my own solutions. And so low code, no code was a natural fit for me, being somebody who loves Excel. But over time, I've really come to realize, A, how dangerous citizen developers can be across organizations, and B, the best practices to go about actually developing things that make sense and work for the organization. That when I win the lottery and don't show up tomorrow is not going to break a critical business process that I had built in place. But why is this really taking hold in the market because a lot of apps are being built everywhere. And IDC prediction in October 2019 was that 500 million new apps are going to be built in the next 5 years. We're 3 years through that 5 years. And if this is an exponential graph, we've still got the majority of those apps ahead of us. It's more than apps that were built in the last 40 years combined. And Gartner said 70% of the applications that get built in 2025 will be done using low-code, no-code technologies. Power Platform is not the only suite of tools out there doing this. There are a lot of others. But Power Platform has seen way more success leaning on adoption through the Microsoft suite than any of these other tool sets out there have. The only other thing I'll point out is that organizations are really lacking development capabilities and struggling to find it and hire it. So that's why they're leaning more and more on people. They're trying to expand the pool of people who can develop solutions and ultimately create more applications at the end of the day that can be used across the organization. This market was estimated to be 13.8 billion in 2021, which was up from 9.1 billion in 2019. And Forbes said the most disruptive trend of 2020 was no code, low code. Microsoft in 2021 came back around and said, okay, we've been yelling about citizen developers and how great they are. We're going to shift our focus. And instead of talking about citizen developers, we're going to coin a new term of fusion development, because it turns out citizen development by itself was not the right bet to have because of all the issues organizations are having. So now we're going to have a new term called fusion development, where pro devs and citizen devs work together in harmony and lots of love and hugs. And together we'll create business solutions across the organization.
So I'll point out, Bryant, that Kip has joined us, and he's over there about ready to break out into Kumbaya.
Yeah, not need to like prop myself up, but I was so against this whole concept when they first started. I was like, citizen development is a stupid idea.
Yep. And the majority of the organizations who just Microsoft turned it on for everybody at the same time, they're all having heartburn. And I'll talk about governance at the very end of this, because that's a piece of things that we do as well as governance around the Power Platform. Oh my goodness, migrating all the solutions and trying to get a handle on the scope creep and the glut of apps and flows that are out there is such a big issue for organizations right now. And I think there maybe should have been a little more thought around from Microsoft as to what they were really thinking the end goal of this all was going to be when they enabled everybody everywhere to create apps and flows. Yeah, same as everything in the Microsoft suite, given the right guardrails, this can be really successful. The problem is nobody really knew how to set it up for success. So I don't want to just bore you all with slides. I want to show you some stuff because this is really where the magic happens when it comes to the Power Platform, is the things we build. The first one I want to show you is something I showed, gosh, 6 years ago at the SharePoint user group with you all. And that was the first app I ever built with Power Apps. I built an app that the purpose was really around culture. It was to help me learn the names and faces of my colleagues. And so as a citizen developer, I hooked into Azure Active Directory and pulled everybody's pictures and names in, and then would randomize it. And you would guess who the person was that the picture showed up on the screen. And if you were right, you would add a point, you'd get your streak going. And if you were wrong, it'd ruin your streak. And ultimately, what happened is everybody got in and started using this. We had interns at the top battling versus our CEO for who could guess the most number of faces correctly. There were a handful of people who didn't have pictures in Active Directory. And so I built in the feature that they could, anybody in the app could click send on this, and it would send them a message as the flow bot in Teams that said, hey, you don't have a picture in Delve and everybody's trying to guess you, go add a picture. And we actually got every single person who hadn't added a photo to add a photo in Delve, which was pretty cool. Helped adoption across our Office 365. But this for me was the very first application I ever built, and one that helped prove to me that Power Apps don't have to be just technical tools that we build. They can actually span any challenge that we're seeing across our organization. Next one I want to show is a Power BI report that was embedded in a Power App. So to kind of give some context here, I don't want to show the screenshots just yet. Have you focus there? Because some context here was that At Slalom, we got brought in for an agricultural company. They're famous for growing potatoes in Idaho. And we built for them a data lake that brought in all their different data sources, 7 different sources of data, including their John Deere tractor APIs that would tell us where their fields had been plowed using those tractors. And it took a year to build this data lake. And at the end of it, what they wanted was the data to be in the hands of the farmers, but they had no idea what Power Apps was. And so they thought the end goal here was going to be a Power BI report. But they got that in the hands of the farmers, and they were doing an export on a weekly basis. The farmers had spent so much money putting moisture probes in their fields and nitrogen probes, and they were getting this data exported to them on a weekly basis as PDFs. And they said, this isn't helpful for me because I need it more in the moment, more real time. And I also can't figure out what the data is actually telling me. So we came in and had this concept of, in the next 5 weeks, we'll produce for you a Power App that kind of fixes both of those problems. So that's the app we produced for them here. It's an app that was built for a phone, but eventually we found out they're also on tablets and computers. So using Power Apps, we made it responsive, which is pretty easy when you get into using containers. But the idea here is it would surface the data for a farmer, and they could filter by the fields that are available to them. I actually built this filtering tool based off of the Amazon mobile apps filters because, hey, you know, Amazon probably spent a lot more money than I did researching users and the user experience. So I used their filtering capabilities here, but a farmer could pull this up in the field in the moment they're there, see if their moisture or nitrogen was out of range, and then take action on it immediately. If they clicked on the field, they could open up and see their nitrogen values. This is an embedded Power BI report here in the Power App. And we're actually sending all of the filtering statements to the Power BI report as parameters in the URL. So pretty cool. These 2 buttons here are actually slicers in the Power BI report. These 2 buttons down here are controls in the Power App. We can combine those 2 together to provide the right filtering experience that we'd want. And actually going backwards after having done this project, I would remove all Power BI filters and do all the filtering in Power Apps because we have so much more control over the look and feel of the filters and the buttons that we had. So here they can see what the nitrogen is like over time, see if they're over or under the limits they've set, and they can add in the soil nitrogen value over time. What's interesting is the potatoes will pull that nitrogen value out as they're ripening and growing, and we expect the nitrogen to decrease over time, which was really interesting. They also they would dig up a bunch of potatoes and send them to a science facility and get the results back, and we could surface all that data in the same app for them. So we gave them that data here. And as you can see, you rotate the phone. We also allowed for that experience to fill the screen and be more responsive. The coolest thing for me, though, was when it came to soil moisture. They were reading out these values in parts per million of soil moisture content. And the farmers told us this doesn't make any sense to me because every field that we have has a different total capacity of moisture. So this is of no value. So we came back to the drawing board and said, well, the farmers are used to taking a dirt clod in their hands and rolling it back and forth and seeing how much dirt falls off onto their hands. And that's how they know the soil moisture content of the field. And they could express that in terms of like a percentage. So they knew by doing that dirt clod test, we're at 75% capacity of the moisture here. So we gave them a form within the Power App to write back to the data set what the current soil moisture percent is. And then we calibrated the Power BI report based off of the soil moisture percent. So then we could read out these values for that particular field, not in parts per million, which they couldn't understand, but in total soil moisture content. And they could refine these over time if it changed and they went out, did that dirt clod test again. But the coolest thing for me is to do that right back with Power Apps to the data set and then use that data in the Power BI report to make sure that data is in a way that makes sense for them.
So you turned your farmers into IoT devices.
Yeah, it's a great way to think about it. Yeah, we got the probes and we got the farmers, and together, yes, the data was coming in clearly.
And you never thought when you joined Slalom that you would become an expert on the science of growing potatoes, did you?
Exactly. That's actually, consulting's been great for me because I'm somebody who just lost interest after, 6-10 months on working on a project. And so going from different industry to different industry has been so good for me. I mean, I only spent 5 weeks with this team and the farmers, but learned so much about potatoes, about nitrogen and soil moisture, and now I move on to something else. So any last questions on this use case? I much prefer embedding the Power BI reports in the Power Apps. I'm going to show you next, and going the other way, a Power BI report that has an embedded Power App. But I'll tell you, it's much easier to work with a Power App that's got that Power BI embedded than it is to go the other way. And I don't know if that's just maturity on Microsoft's end of how they built those integrations. It is way more difficult to pass data from a Power BI report into a Power App because of the bugs, because the data connection can break at any moment if you do something wrong. I would always recommend going this route instead, if possible. All right. Power App embedded in a Power BI report. Let me go over to this one. I've got a live demo. So this was for,
Also,
yeah. What? Sorry, I missed that.
I said it's Contoso.
It is Contoso. We all love Contoso. So yeah, this is based off of a project we did for a semiconductor manufacturer, who the CFO wanted to visualize their forecast. Pretty common use case. Visualize their financial forecast over time in a Power BI report, and they had done all their forecasting logic in SAP, and we brought that into Synapse. And so surfacing that in Power BI is not necessarily that much of a difficult thing, but the ask from the CFO was, I also have scenarios that I want to put into this forecast that I may want to hide from other people. I may want to show other people, but it will definitely change the forecast over time. How can I do that? And so we had this idea of embedding a Power App in here that would allow the CFO to then write these what if scenarios into the data, and using row level security, decide whether or not we want to show those scenarios to other people. So over here in the lower right corner, this is the Power App that's been embedded. And it looks so seamless, you'd never know that was a Power App. You'd think it was just a piece of the report that was built in Power BI. I've got these two what if scenarios here, and they're both marked as private, meaning if I open this report, I see them here and they affect all the calculations. But if Kevin opens this report, he doesn't see these scenarios. And so his forecasted is going to calculate different over time because he doesn't have the scenarios. I could come into any one of these and now publish this, save it, and it immediately saves it to the data source and will update all of my Power BI visuals. And of course, it's going to lag because the demo gods have got me here. But it's usually much faster. And it'll update all of these visuals to match any new values that have been added. And now if Kevin opened this report, he could now see that I've put in this scenario investing in a certain company and see that immediately. I can also add in a new scenario. We're going to acquire Apple. And put that in fiscal 2022 Q1. So I have time to raise all of that money. And we got him at a steal of $500,000. So I'm going to save this scenario. It saves it into the Synapse layer and refreshes. You saw it pop into our visual because this is direct query to that Synapse and recalculates all of our forecasted money. So pretty common scenario, I think, and we can embed a Power App to resolve, a lot of the problems or opportunities we see with a forecast. The other thing that we heard sorry, was there a comment or question? Okay.
We were just being impressed that you were buying Apple.
Yeah. It makes sense, I think, for our semiconductor manufacturer to purchase Apple rather than the other way around, right?
Yes.
All right. The other piece here that was very useful, helpful, and cool, I think, was putting in an app that allowed you to actually modify the forecast itself. So something that we wouldn't say is necessarily a what-if scenario, but may need to be modified when it comes to the forecast, is if we plan on doing share repurchases or stock buybacks or paying dividends, That's not going to come out in our formulas that we have in SAP, but we need to add that in manually. So we add this tab in here. We've got a huge Power App that's taking up a lot more real estate, and we only give the ability to modify these fields to certain people who can then update this forecast. If somebody else were to open this tab, we use logic in Power Apps to show them a screen that says you don't have permissions to change the forecast. And we're using an Azure Active Directory group to determine who does and doesn't have permissions to do that. And they can come here and add in something like a dividend or a stock buyback at a certain quarter or month in the future. And then that immediately gets reflected for everybody in the forecast. So using Power Apps here to do writebacks within Power BI, very useful. I will say in this case, we don't actually pass any data to the Power App. And that gets rid of all of the hangups and frustrations that I mentioned earlier that come with doing a Power App embedded in Power BI. It's literally just hosted here. And when it does write back or read, it knows what tables to do it without receiving context from the Power BI report. You can do that. You can pass data from Power BI to Power App. It's just very, very difficult experience. All right, any questions on this sort of use case?
Super fancy.
Very fancy.
Could you make a comment on, you mentioned earlier about using the context to allow the screen size to adjust to whether you're on a phone or a tablet. Are you
Yep.
using that same thing on this when you switch to that other view of the report? Like you had the bigger screen on that Power App?
It's a great question. In an embedded scenario with Power Apps, you can't actually read the screen size. So these are all fixed screen sizes we gave the app. It's the same with a SharePoint form. If somebody were to open up a SharePoint form that's been customized with Power Apps, it doesn't actually read the screen size, and so you can't do much stretching or changing of that screen. So that's unfortunately not something that's possible in an embedded scenario in Power BI or using it as a form in SharePoint.
Got it. So if you were to use this as a standalone Power App, you could build it so you could pull this same screen up on your iPhone and have only one of those columns showing, for example.
Exactly.
And do you do that? Do you mix, like, does your client use this for thing, and then if you say, hey, if you want to pull this up on your phone, here's the Power App to do it? Or do you just always do it in one place, one or the other?
I would, if they wanted that second scenario, I'd build a separate app for it.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't, doing the app that's got the inherent Power BI integration in it, that would be meant for a scenario where it's open within the Power BI report. And so some of the functionality would break if you tried to just use it in Power Apps and try to refresh the Power BI report, but wouldn't have an active connection to it. So yeah, I'd build a separate app for use by itself.
So as I'm thinking about these use cases, Bryant, these screens would not be a joy to look at on a phone, even if they were responsive, just because there's so much content here. And so putting it in as a separate app would also give you an opportunity to focus on the bits of data that would work well on a phone, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on. Yeah, if I was to take this exact app, you're right, I would show just 1 month, but even then would be a lot. You'd have to scroll down to see more data. It may make sense to do some sort of summaries or do pop-up modals, you know, just break up the data for sure.
And the beauty of a Power App is that you could do that in a much quicker time than you could by building a custom SPFX application.
Yeah, I've never built an SPFX application, so I can't comment on the dev time there, but I mean, yeah, you can spin up something like this. I would say probably 4 weeks to create, you know, there's a future quarters tab, 4 weeks to create this application from start to finish. It's so fast. You know, a lot of what you see here actually is just an image. I didn't put all this stuff in here as separate, like this icon here is not a separate graphic element. The entire thing you see here is an image with just the text here and the titles being the only dynamic pieces. So you can get away with a lot of stuff like that just by doing it as an image. And I built this image in PowerPoint and exported it, you know, saved it as an image and then imported it in Power Apps too.
So when you click on future quarters there, does it tab over? Like,
I'm scared to do it. I'm scared to do it because I don't know if it works. I might get stuck here at this loading screen just because this is a demo. I don't think it was actually fully built out.
Got it.
But yeah, you see it, the tab changed. I mean, that's just a different image where I made that the active tab, right?
That's pretty sneaky. I like it.
It's very sneaky.
And it is frozen there, I'm sure. So
Thanks
yeah,
for taking the risk.
little tricks. All right, so I'll move on to the next use case. Actually, I do have one slide to show on this. If anybody's of interest as to how that what if scenario app works, right, is when it's loading, it's actually caching the data from Synapse. And then if you were to view a scenario or create a new scenario and make changes, as soon as you hit that save button, it's actually triggering a flow in Power Automate because we can't patch directly to Synapse. It's not a native connector. And that flow is then triggering a stored procedure. And that stored procedure is updating the tables in Synapse. It's also refreshing the cache next. Not the stored procedure isn't refreshing the cache, but we refresh the cache from Synapse once that stored procedure is done. And then we trigger a refresh in Power BI, and it goes back to this home screen. So the magic in the background there is Power Automate. Any other data source, and I would just patch directly, right? If it supports that, do a direct write. The Forecast Builder app, similarly, it is publishing, or it's sending all the data updates to Power Automate and triggering the stored procedure. In this case, since there are so many changes, we just put in a trigger for a Power BI refresh every 5 seconds while you have the app open. And that takes care of the issue of, this stored procedure may take minutes because you may be passing so much data back in there. And so that's what we did. We just did it on a timer. But nobody ever mentioned anything about having those updates not show up. So
Awesome.
yeah. All right, inspection management. We worked with an energy company who's got a bunch of facilities and wanted to help them manage their inspections over time. I've got this app pulled up here. And I'll mention this as far as data sources are concerned. If an organization has premium licenses for Power Apps, I absolutely would always recommend Dataverse or SQL. Depending on if you've got a lot of SQL solutions, SQL is a great data source for Power Apps. If you don't have a ton of SQL and you're not particular about it, I always would recommend Dataverse. It's a fantastic data source. If you don't have a premium license, SharePoint's the best data source that's out there that's free. So SharePoint lists as a backend for Power Apps is in my opinion, it's a fantastic data source. I wouldn't do it if you've got a premium license. But in this case, the backend here is SharePoint, and they were managing their safety inspections on a SharePoint list. And so they'd put in here the facility name, the location, who they're assigning the inspection, the date the inspection needs to happen, and they were tracking who completes it on what day. Got the location here too. So building a Power App on top of a list like this is fairly simple. I built this app in 8 hours on top of that SharePoint list. If you don't have to do any data work, setting up the underlying data sources, I'll say data tables and relationships, building the app itself is fairly simple. And so this just shows that same list, but here in a Power App that can be taken on a mobile device then and opened up. I've got my own inspections here where it sorts the list by me. I can open these up. It pre-fills data for me, and I can add any safety issues that we run into along the way. I can add as many as I want because this is also a separate SharePoint list. So I'd say this is a pretty common use case, is just a simple app on top of a SharePoint list. What I would never recommend for any production scenario is using a Excel data source. But I'm going to do it here real quickly because I want to show you how simple it is to generate an app. But again, don't use Excel for a data source. I've seen too many times that the Excel sheet gets corrupted. And then you're out and you've got to re-plug in everything to a new Excel sheet. Just a headache. But using this Excel sheet,
SharePoint
So-
good, Excel bad.
Sorry, what?
SharePoint good, Excel bad.
Yes, SharePoint list, 2 thumbs up. Excel does not get any thumbs up. As
I
a
will
data
mention
source.
that my phone tells me that we have a person in Teams that wants to talk about data visualization. So put that in the back of your head.
Yes, I'm happy to share some tips on visualization best practices for sure. This is the last piece here I'll show, but I'm here in Power Apps, make.powerapps.com. You can start an app from any of these data sources. So I mentioned SQL here, Dataverse here. They actually just added in the ability for me to sketch it out on a piece of paper and import it. Very cool. Not useful if you've tried this. Not useful in the slightest. All the work you have to do, I would never start from a sketch. I'd always start from scratch.
Does anybody think that now that Adobe's bought Figma, that's going to go away?
Microsoft announced a bunch of integrations with Adobe, so I don't think this is going to go away. I think it'll just further their partnership. But Figma's actually got a UI kit for Power Apps, and you can design a wireframe in Figma, and it knows, depending on which of those drop downs or text inputs that you've used in Figma, it will map those to controls here. I haven't used this enough to say whether or not it's I would assume it's better than the handwritten sheet, but who knows?
Cool, but not useful.
Yeah, cool, but not useful. So here I've clicked Excel to start as my data source. It's going to get things ready. It's going to ask me where my Excel sheet is. I've loaded it up in OneDrive for Business. It's my sales December 2020, and it has to be formatted as a table. And then I'll hit connect. And it's doing its really cool stuff in the background. Tiny bit of AI in here to figure out the right columns to show. And it's going to generate for me an application based on the data set I provide. Most of the time, it's the exact same form of application. I've got a general screen where I can browse the data. I can add a new row to the data set. I can modify any of the data records. And you'll see here, if you've never seen the Power Apps Maker portal, it's a lot like PowerPoint over here, where I've got what would be your slides in PowerPoint. But it's a lot like Excel as well, where I've got the Excel kind of formula bar up at the top. Anything I click on here has a variety of properties and formulas that I can set those properties. So the only thing I'm going to show here is I'm going to rename this app. Instead of being named Table 2, which is the name of my table in my sheet, I'm going to actually welcome the current user to the app. So this is a formula, and if you were using Excel, you'd type this the same way. I'll type, open double quote, welcome, comma, space, and close that double quote, then add an ampersand, and then use the user function, user open close parentheses. It gives me all the information about the current user, and then do type full name. That will now say, welcome Bryant Boyer to the application. And if I preview this using the play button, that's now at the top of my app. That's awesome that this is, simple low code. I can make that change. But built out in this app right away from Excel, I can view any row, I can edit any row, I can delete any row, and all of this will immediately be written back to my Excel sheet or my SharePoint list or my SQL database and respect my permissions. So it's really that simple. And I could save and publish this and pull it up right away and show you my phone, and it would be right here on my phone. You would download the Power Apps app, and then you'd have access to all your Power Apps. A recent feature update as well is we can now package this as a mobile app and deploy it to the iOS store or the Google Play Store as a standalone app. It would still require users to authenticate with an account that is in my tenant. So this isn't a way to monetize Power Apps or provide external access, but I can make it so then it can be deployed via Intune to all of my employees' mobile devices as a standalone app. So that's creating an app using the Power Apps interface. A couple more things I want to show, and then I'll turn it over to Q&A. Governance and management. Out of the box, organizations are set up to be full federation, and that means that anyone anywhere can create an application. No barriers, no boundaries, I can generate environments. I can use any connector. I can connect our SAP data to Twitter and stream all of our accounts' names just out there onto Twitter, because that's awesome. We should go in and.
That's not a real world scenario.
No, I have not run into that use case, but I have run into use cases where a client of ours accidentally had somebody stream client information from Salesforce out to Twitter. They didn't understand what exactly was going on and what they were doing. So that is one use case that I have seen, is the Salesforce contract data going out to Twitter. The easiest way to do that is to set up the DLP policies. Right away, anybody can go in who is an admin to the Power Platform. You've got 3 buckets. You've got business connectors, non-business connectors, and blocked connectors. And simply by putting Twitter in the non-business connectors and Salesforce in the business connectors, you have forbidden anyone from using those 2 connectors in the same solution. So it's as simple as that. You don't stop people. You know, marketing does need to use Twitter because they monitor our Twitter account and the hashtags and people's retweets. And so we don't forbid that. And in fact, marketing probably has their own environment where we give a custom DLP policy. Really, most organizations need to get to the point where they're doing partial federation, where IT governs everything. They control the environments, they control the DLP policies, but where possible, different business units like finance or other business units have makers that have gone through training and now have access to a dedicated dev environment there where they can do work. HR probably doesn't care enough to have their own makers, so they're going to lean on IT to use app devs. Heaven forbid we go Fusion Dev, and let some citizens help out as well. But partial federation is where we see the most success with organizations in managing and governing the Power Platform. Centralized doesn't scale very well, but you do have complete control. And that's IT does everything. They're the only ones developing solutions. If you care about this sort of stuff, governance in the Power Platform, you can go check out Microsoft's maturity model. They have a really rich and robust maturity model. I can provide the link to it. You can just search online Power Platform COE maturity model, and Microsoft has a really filled out strategy here. Last piece I'll mention around ROI is Power Platform can do so much for your organization, for everybody's organizations. The ROI from the Forrester study, the total economic impact, was 188% over 3 years. It's kind of a slow burn, I'd say. You would use free licenses, you'd use SharePoint forms until you found the right use case to go premium with a SQL app or a Dataverse app that provides so much value, and then the investment into the licenses makes a lot of sense. Microsoft's going to try to push everybody to buy premium licenses for everyone at the org. But if you find the right use case, that's where it really makes sense. It saves a ton of time, 3.2 hours in line of business employees. And then if you strictly want to just augment your development teams by using Power Platform, that's where you're seeing things like 74% reduction in development costs, because they can do it faster. They can go quicker, and deploying and maintaining the solutions is easier. I'll stop there, get off my soapbox, and answer any Q&A that we've got.
Have that data visualization question from the chat.
Yeah, okay. So I see any resources or tips on general data visualization best practices. So if that's like a Power BI question, I've got some best practices that I follow. I'm by no means an expert when it comes to Power BI. But what I'll say with Power BI is the same tip I said with Power Apps, where I use images in the background. Actually, all of these squares and the shadows behind, this is just one giant image I use as my background here. I generally use this layout in every Power BI report I create, which is I've got my KPIs across the top here that make sense. And it's always going to be read from left to right and top to bottom. So you want your most critical thing right here. And you don't want your granular data like your tables to be up top because of the visual hierarchy. This is where whoever's reading the report is going to start, and they're going to go left to right and top to bottom. I generally like to have 3 questions that each page answers. And if there's more than that, you probably have too much data on the same page. There's lots of stuff online, I can point somebody to some resources I've got out there as well. But hey, honestly, I'll go to Pinterest and I'll go to Google and I'll say, show me dashboard examples, and I'll just find some really cool looking ones and use that as my starting point. Honestly, it's a good way to go.
You talked about stealing from Amazon, it seems like, and there are orgs that spend trillions of dollars figuring this out, and it does make sense to steal from them instead of trying to spend our own money.
Exactly. I think the best Power Platform developers are just thieves.
So the only exception I would take with that statement is you can just say the best developers are thieves.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I don't have the development background to make that sort of general statement for developers, but I'll take your word for it.
If I'm not stealing code from Stack Overflow at least 2 or 3 times a day, I'm not doing my job.
Exactly.
But you said, so you are using an image instead of trying to get all these boxes to be perfect. You just put a background image that kind of sets it up, and then the data itself is just all white space around it, right? So you don't worry about it.
Exactly. And if you've developed Power BI reports before, you'll know that anything that gets added here can have a visual header to it. So when you hover, it has these annoying little icons that'll show up. So in my opinion, the more you can get out of Power BI and into an image, the better. Because you won't run into that kind of stuff. And if this were an image, if I clicked on this rectangle here, it would select the white rectangle and raise it up over all the data I had. Just all that sort of stuff just leads me to use images as much as possible.
Good idea.
When you do those images, as far as the size goes, is there a certain size that you're targeting for the sheet? Like, are they all, is it all one image that you're sort of piecing together?
Yeah, let me see if I can probably open up the, I have an Adobe Illustrator file I use for my report backgrounds. Let me see if I can find that. But yeah, there is one canvas size. And then the only thing that really matters, in my opinion, is just to make sure that the uniform space between all the elements, because there's nothing more distracting to me than if this gap between these two was a little bit different than, let's say, the gap between these two. And so you can't really do that sort of granular control very well in Power BI anyways. So I end up taking that to PowerPoint or Adobe Illustrator.
That's a good idea.
I don't know that you can see it, but there's a lot of heads nodding.
Okay. Yeah, when it comes to app UI, I mean, there is so much rich content out there. I'll go to sites like Dribbble is a site that has UI elements. Honestly, loading.io has all the loading GIFs that you could ever want for Power Apps. Loading.io is where I go every time I want to create a loading GIF. There's UIelement.com, I think, is one. Adobe's got a UI UX sort of repository. So I honestly don't ever create my own UIs from scratch. I'm always starting somewhere from something somebody has already made.
What other questions do we have?
I don't mean to ask the same question over again, but I'm super intrigued because I didn't realize you could make Power Apps responsive. Or do you have resources that you can suggest for that? Is that a relatively, like, I built my last app maybe 2 years ago. Is this a recent thing in Power Apps?
It's definitely better now than it was 2 years ago. I didn't really get into responsive apps until about a year ago. There's a few things you'll want to do, and I can send some resources in the chat here. But most apps by default are not great at responsiveness because they don't use something called a container. So if I'm in here trying to design this app to be responsive, let me just insert a brand new screen. Wow, my internet connection is going really slowly. All right.
The baby's coming.
That's right. Oh, I'm not even clicking the right one. New screen. Wow, so slow.
Because you opened an Adobe product and that just ate every piece.
Oh, you nailed it. You nailed it. Yeah, you're right. Okay, let me just show this real quick, then I can close Adobe Illustrator. Oh my gosh. Oh, and it crashed. All right, so no Adobe Illustrator. Maybe that frees up some processing. Okay, so I've got that. Adding what's called, it's under layout here. These containers are the key to going responsive. So they've got horizontal containers, and if I add one in here, you can set, the width of it. If you drag it, it's going to be static. But if I grab the size over here and change the width, I can click width and it will jump me up here. And I'll always go parent.width because the parent is the screen, and the screen size will change depending on if I'm in the browser, on a tablet, or on my phone. And so I can make this container always be the width of the current screen. And if I add any elements into this container, let's say I add in, let's just do some icons. So I do an add document icon. If I add in a second icon here, like a like dislike, oh, sorry, that changed it. Add library, it will automatically put it right next to it and it will adjust. And I can set this container to actually do it based on the center. And so, if my screen size gets larger, smaller, it will actually adjust the space there. And I can set each of these elements to have a flexible width. And so it will fill the space that I give it. And if I set both of these to flexible width, you'll see that it says, how many portions do you want me to fill? 1 out of 2. And so depending on the screen size here, each of these is going to be half of the container. If I drag, let's say the screen size got smaller, you see that these will adjust depending on how big that screen size is. So I didn't actually have to write any code to make this responsive. There are some settings I need to put into place. For example, it's going to keep the, let's see, display. It's going to keep the aspect ratio. You have to disable that. And the scale to fit needs to be on, so it always fills the available space. But this piece allows it to change really simply. If you do want to go like complete different experience for tablet versus desktop, I usually just break that out into a separate screen, and you can read the current screen size and say, okay, if it's over 700 pixels wide, I'm going to call it a tablet. If it's over 1000 or 1200 pixels, I'm going to call it a desktop. And then I'm just going to use the desktop screens I've created in the app. If it's going to be really complex, I would go that route instead.
That's great. And when you're creating an app from the beginning, if I remember right, there's a choice whether you choose the phone or the tablet. Is that?
Yep.
So do you just choose tablet here, and then everyone with a phone, it'll just scale down for them?
I would start from whatever the primary thing is going to be. If this is primarily a mobile app, but somebody might pull it up on their desktop, I'd start it as a portrait phone app and then build out the responsiveness from there. You're absolutely not stuck with anything. You can always come here and change and display. If you're portrait, landscape, you can turn off the scale to fit. You're not stuck with what you initially selected, but I would always start with whatever the primary device is that's going to access the app.
Thanks, this is great.
Yeah, no problem.
Any other questions?
Bryant, we said that we would normally went till about 5:30. My timing device says we're at 5:26, so you're 100% accurate. Thank you for spending an hour with us on the impending birth of your child. We appreciate your wisdom and your sharing with us. We've been joined by the leader of Journey Team. Any last words you want to share with us, Brian?
No.
Okay. We are going to socialize here in the room, but we'll let you that are online go your way. Again, Bryant, thanks for your time. I found it to be incredibly informative and educational. And go have a baby.
Thanks. I appreciate the time and being with you all. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye, everyone.
Bryant, you rock.
Thanks, Noah. See ya.
Kiss them babies.
No, you should be here.
Well.